Let's call this meeting to order before Councilor Erickson gets me in trouble. And this is the information meeting of your city council. Today is the 10th of January, 2017. I was just saying to someone today, do you believe it's 2017 already? But here we are, and we're moving forward in this great city. So thank you for being here today. Welcome, and we will look at the first agenda item, which is the minutes of the Thursday, December 29th and Thursday, January 5th audit committee meetings. I would look for a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. I will give just a quick report on that, is that it dealt, both those meetings dealt with personnel issues around the hiring of a new internal auditor. Any council open discussion? Seeing none, we'll move on to our first agenda item, which is a presentation by our soon-to-be retired city audit manager, our internal audit manager, Rich Oksel, and he's going to talk about cash-wide city. Let's start over. Citywide cash dispersals. Mr. Oksel.
Well, we'll do two reports, and if with your indulgence, we'll do the traffic signal report first, and then we'll go to the city cash. Both these reports were approved by the audit committee last Thursday, and we do have our city's traffic engineer here. If there's some questions that you have that I can't answer, or you want to ask the engineer, he's available. So, call this up on the. There we go. So we called this a independent analysis instead of an audit, because we weren't looking at risk and controls or something like that. It wasn't a contract compliance audit. It was merely an analysis of the data. And just as a little background, the conventional traffic signal systems that the city uses for almost all of its intersections use a pre-programmed daily timing schedule. Now, this adaptive signal control technology is being used on 26th Street from about Cliff Avenue over to the Veterans Parkway. There's 10 intersections there, and it was installed in January of 2015, so it's been there almost 2 years now. And that is used, it uses cameras, computer hardware, and software to adjust the timing of the red, yellow, and green lights to accommodate the changing traffic patterns. The benefits of the ASCT are improved traffic flow, faster response to traffic conditions, cutting costs because the cars are hopefully idling less and using less gas. And then also it's kinder to the environment because you have cars that are moving along faster, and they're not, the traffic isn't as congested. As I said, it's on, right now it's currently on East 26th Street from Cliff to Veterans Parkway. And that was the focus of the analysis. However, in 2017, as I think the council knows, Minnesota Avenue from 18th to the interstate, going south from 18th to the interstate, and then also 41st, will have the technology installed, and that should be completed by June of this year. And that's a joint project between the city and the South Dakota Department of Transportation. The city will be paying for Minnesota Avenue, and the state will be paying for the installation on 41st Street. Now, lessons learned on the bottom of page 3 of the report. I'm not going to go through all the lessons learned, but one thing I'd point out is that the cameras can store the video images. However, the city chooses not to, because for one thing, it takes up a lot of server capacity, and there's a lot of cost to that. And the other point is it's not necessary for the operation of the technology. You don't have to store the images. So occasionally the traffic engineer, or maybe not occasionally, I'm not sure, but Heath will get calls from people that have had an accident, and then they would like to get video from the cameras to, just for the purposes of maybe exonerating them or maybe or not. And they're not able to accommodate that request because the images simply aren't stored. As far as the results of the analysis, starting at the bottom of page 4, we found that when we looked at the data, the traffic congestion was getting better after the installation back in January of 2015, when we compared the data from before and after, as far as the number of delays, the traffic stops, number of the travel time improved, except with one exception. It was that eastbound traffic on 26 during the afternoon peak from 4 to 6 p.m. As you can see there in the kind of the middle of page 5 there, for example, the travel time, there was an 11% increase after the installation, and there was a 27% increase in the number of traffic stops. And so when we talked with the traffic engineers, we believe the reason is because before the installation of the technology, the timing of the lights was heavily skewed for that afternoon peak going east to favor the 26th Street corridor, and that would be at the expense of the side streets. For example, Bonson and Southeastern Drive, you'd have to wait a long time, whereas, so after the installation of the technology, things were more balanced, so the traffic flow was much better balanced, both for the 26th Street and for the side streets. So that was the only surprise. Otherwise, the traffic congestion, we saw a definite improvement in those different drive times. As far as the safety increased on the corridor after installation. Typically what cities find is that when you put that ASCT and get that going, it usually results in fewer rear-end collisions because the traffic is flowing better. Before the installation, we found there was a collision on the 26th Street corridor about every 3 days. After the technology was installed, it was about every 4 days, so there's a definite improvement. And using the data from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, they've done all the crunching of the numbers, and they come up with societal costs based upon the severity of the accident, including everything from, property damage, lost earnings, medical costs, emergency services, on and on and on. There's a tremendous amount of cost to any sort of collision, and as the severity of the accident goes up, that the costs get much, much more. And so of our analysis, we confirmed that there was a cost about $891 per day. And so after about just over a year, after about 416 days, that taxpayer investment in dollars of $371,000 was recovered just with less societal costs, fewer accidents and that sort of thing. So that was very encouraging. So we concluded that it was increasing the safety on the 26th Street corridor by reducing the number of crashes. So the results so far are encouraging. It's a limited sample, obviously. One thing that you might want to point out to your constituents is that just because that technology is installed on Minnesota Avenue and 41st, you're not going to get a green light all the way through the corridor. I mean, you have to have realistic expectations. And this technology is never a cure-all for a corridor that's simply oversaturated. If it's oversaturated, even with the technology, it's not going to be the most pleasant experience. But I think we're going to find that we're pleased with the results once it's up and operational. So if you have any questions, I'm here. Heath is here as well to answer your questions, and we'll be happy to entertain those now.
I would entertain some questions. Councilor Staley.
Talking about that crosswalk at 26th and Van Epps, I've actually used that myself in the past. That's by the Horace Mann School, which makes it very important that that thing would be changing in a timely manner. And I was wondering, in other areas around town, I know downtown here they change rather rapidly. What, in other residential areas like that, what's the time frame? Because you said it could go up to 65 seconds.
It could, yeah. I think Heath is in. Heath, you want to handle that question? Yeah. Okay.
Heath Hofteser, Principal Traffic Engineer for the City of Sioux Falls. For how long the cycle length is, for how long you could possibly wait for a pedestrian light somewhere in the typical signals that are in the residential areas, it's about 60 to 70 seconds is usually what the cycle length is at those intersections. So typically, you'd probably expect if you push the button, it's going to be 20 to 30 seconds before you get the light. But if you absolutely hit it at the wrong time, it could be 60 seconds in those situations. So that would be where it just lost the signal has a window where it can accept a call from like a pedestrian input on the side street. And if you just miss that window, just after it happened in the 60-second cycle, it could take almost 60 seconds before it is able to serve. But in most cases, typically in those residential intersections, you're probably looking at 20 seconds.
Have you ever had any complaints from the school district about children being able to get across the street?
We haven't had complaints from the school district. We've fielded a couple complaints from citizens at 26th and Van Epps. And probably one of the biggest things is because prior to putting in the adaptive signal system at 26th and Van Epps, we were running a half cycle at that intersection. So we were actually running, depending on time of day, anywhere from 55 to 75 seconds. So we were running a fairly short cycle. So a lot of times it would serve pedestrians probably in 20 seconds. And now a lot of times it's, I would say on average, they're looking at 40 seconds at that intersection now. So 20 seconds to 40 seconds, that's, we doubled the length they're waiting. It's not a long time to wait, but it is significant and it's noticeable to the pedestrian in that situation.
Thank you.
Councilor Kiley.
Thank you. Heath, when this was presented to the audit committee, we had some questions about the time period, 4 to 6 p.m. along 26th Street and the number of how it actually had opposite effect of what we had intended. The other time periods, very good results. Mm-hmm. And we made the assumption that it created more slowdowns and stops for the 26 corridor because Southeastern and Bonson and some of the other north-south streets were better regulated and their flow actually was improved. As we move forward with moving beyond 26th Street onto Minnesota Avenue and what was the other street? That
41st Street.
41st Street.
Yep.
Maybe we could, in addition to driving, I know with the 26th Street corridor, you drove the corridor a number of times. I don't recall that you stated that you had driven the Southeastern Avenue or Bonson Avenue. Maybe if you would do that with the other major corridors that cross Minnesota Avenue, that'll give you more information as to, okay, if we have more stops and slowdowns during this time period, and we're assuming it's because the other cross traffic flow has improved, maybe that'll give you that definite information.
Yep. And what we did do to try to capture some of that on 26th Street, we went out and we were measuring queue lengths on Southeastern and on the interstate ramps where they were significant. And we did see a reduction in the lengths of the queues, but that's hard to relate back to delays at the intersection. It doesn't relate exactly. One of the things, some of the new technology that we're just starting to introduce to our city right now, in fact, I was working at it in the office earlier this afternoon, is automated traffic signal performance measures. And what this is, it's kind of taking the detection technology we have out in the street, and it's taking the traffic signal controllers that we have, basically the little computers in the intersections. They're starting to get a little bit more powerful, kind of more like almost like an iPad type of processor inside of them, to the point where they're able to do a lot of different things and run different apps. And there's applications now that we're starting to work with that let us use the existing detection we have out in the street to analyze a little bit better what traffic's doing. And one of the things that we want to do with the Minnesota Avenue corridor and the 41st Street corridor is look at arrivals on greens at the key intersections. And what that is, we're able to analyze in the new technology. It's able to, when we set up the detectors correct, it's able to look at when the vehicles are getting to the intersection. Are they getting there in a red, or are they getting there in a green? And that's one of the things we'll be able to look at from all the different directions at the different intersections, is how many vehicles are arriving on green. When we make the improvements, put in the new system, do we improve how many are arriving on green? And then that's something we're going to be able to use in the future for when we make changes. Did we actually improve what people are experiencing out on the corridor? So,
Okay, great job. And Heath, you and your team have done a nice job implementing the system along the 26th Street corridor. A lot of successes, and I look forward to those same types of successes along Minnesota Avenue and 41st Street.
Councilor Neitzer.
Something I neglected to ask at the audit committee is, do these systems lend themselves to the best use only on long stretches of arterials, or can they be beneficial in like an isolated intersection or pockets?
There's some benefit. You could use them in isolated situations. It depends on, in an isolated intersection, it would depend on the type of traffic fluctuations that you see throughout the day, on whether you could use kind of a typical programming using maximum using different types of maximums in the controller that change throughout the day to kind of help the actuation improve what's going on. Or in some situations on that, when I want to say that isolated intersection, it can bump it up another tier on how it operates too. So there can be some improvement for those. As of right now, we've been working with the corridors. There's been some of the other communities have started to experiment with isolated intersections, but they haven't focused on that a lot yet.
What about for example, if I take my daughter to school, there's certain intersections lights that are pretty awful a couple times a day, but otherwise they're free flowing. Would those help in that situation?
It could help in those situations, yeah. And that's where we're starting to look at what we can do. The technology for the adaptive signal control on what it costs to install it for an intersection is not much more than it costs to put regular detection in an intersection that's being built when it's first being built. So we're looking at getting specifications in place for implementing, going forward in the future, implementing them from the start where it makes sense.
You just maybe answered my question, was whether the cost was getting to the point where you just, every time you do a new one or a replacement, you just do that going forward.
Yeah. And we're not quite there, but I would say in the next year here, we're gonna be at that point with it, so.
Okay, great.
Anyone else? I would entertain a motion to accept this report.
So move.
I think we do on these. We're bringing the ones to council that we,
And I'll second that then.
okay. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next one is citywide cash audit. Mr. Oxel.
Yes, this, when I started the office 10 years ago in 2007, this was one of our first projects, was a similar audit of all the departments that received cash. And also, that's kind of my right off into the sunset audit is citywide cash. And over the years, though, we have done a lot of these detailed audits of cash handling, and I put that on I think on page 9 of the report there. Cash handling audit areas by year. The reason we did it here in 2016 was at the request of the mayor when we solicited input from elected officials for the 2016 annual audit plan. He had requested that or suggested that we put this on the plan, and we agreed with that. So we went ahead and did that. And on page 2 through 4, I'm not going to read this to you or go through it. It's more for your education. If you're interested in that sort of thing, it's just sort of the reasons that the city accepts cash on the page 2 there, and then at the bottom there, the risk of misappropriation. Or cash is it's a high risk area. The controls that we would expect to be in place. Controls that we would expect to be in place, in other words, those control activities, what we'd expect to see, and then the limitations of controls. In other words, if there's collusion, obviously, if there's two people working together, they can defeat any sort of control that you might have. Another thing that we included in this audit, which we've never done before, is we looked at something called the PCI DSS, which means Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. That's why we abbreviate it. It's kind of a mouthful. But anyway, we wanted to determine that we were in compliance with this standard. The standard was the major card companies, Discover and Visa, et cetera. They came up with this about 10 years ago. And it's intended to protect the information that organizations get from their customers, the credit card numbers and so on. They want to make sure those numbers are protected from hackers or being numbers being stolen. So we wanted to make sure that the city was in compliance with those standards. So that was something new for us. I want to point out noteworthy accomplishments on the bottom of page 5 there that the finance department has been successful in reducing the number of petty cash funds with the goal toward pretty much eliminating petty cash in the city. Change funds will always be necessary as long as there's currency. You're going to need change funds. But as far as the petty cash, you can probably get by without it nowadays. Departments have what's known as P cards. Those are like corporate credit cards for the small dollar purchases. So there really isn't as much need for petty cash, and that's a good thing from an audit perspective. You don't want to have cash in the office if you really don't need it. So that was certainly noteworthy. I want to point that out. Now to the results of the audit there on page 6 there. We looked at the prior audit recommendations from past audits. We determined that they were implemented. We're happy to see that. Number 2, that city departments do have up-to-date written policies and procedures specific to their departments for cash handling. Now, the finance department has kind of an overall city policy, but a lot of times the department will need something specific to their department. For example, the park department for the pool cashiers, they might have a specific procedures. We did find that city departments have good segregation or adequate segregation of duties in regard to cash. That's a key control. If you don't have segregation of duties, it means one person is in a position to be able to receive the money, record it, et cetera, and they might be tempted to misappropriate the money. And so we want to make sure that there was segregation of duties. We want to make sure that deposits or the money that's received by city departments is getting into the bank in a timely manner. We found that it was. Normally, in most cases, within 2 business days. And also looked at the physical security to protect the cash. In other words, make sure that somebody couldn't just easily steal the cash or break in. So that's something we checked at the various departments, and we found that to be adequate. So the last thing we looked at was that PCI DSS, and we found that the city does not collect the credit card numbers. We don't put it on the city servers. It goes to a third-party processor. City employees, when they receive information, say over the phone, they simply key it in. They're not writing it down on a piece of paper or anything like that. We don't record a conversation with the customers. Like sometimes you call a business and they'll say this conversation is being recorded for quality control. If you're doing that and you're accepting credit card numbers, you got to be very careful about that. You're not storing those recordings because that's a record of the credit card numbers and expiration dates and things like that. So we don't do that. And so I think we're good there. I didn't have any concerns about that. We did have 2 recommendations there on the bottom of page 7 there. We did recommend that finance should provide formal training for city employees at handling cash, because right now it's more on-the-job training. There wasn't any particular formal training going on, with the possible exception of the pool cashiers. Each summer when the new cashiers are hired, they have quite a bit of training to use the cash registers. But finance agreed with that recommendation. And then we also recommended that the city management continue to pursue what's known as ACH or bank-to-bank transactions, both for monies that we receive and then when we pay out, when we make payments. And the city has been successful in getting more and more of ACH transactions, and we just encourage them to continue that because it's more efficient for one thing, and it's a lot safer. You don't have checks or currency, that sort of thing. It's just bank to bank. So if you have any questions, I'm here. Our finance director's here. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions, Councilor Neitzer?
Just curious, for the ACH withdrawals, is there a service charge associated with that, and what is that compared to a credit card service charge?
I don't know. Is Tracy here? He was. Tracy, you want to? I don't think I can answer that question about a service charge for ACH.
Obviously, that would be a charge incurred by the city for the convenience of doing it.
Generally, they're very, very inexpensive transaction to process. I can't tell you offhand what the per item fee might be. Oftentimes, there is no charge. So.
Okay, thank you.
No one else? Councilor Staley.
Okay, on page 7, I was just curious, you said you became aware of an outside agency that by contract receives payments for fees. What would that be about?
That would be the police department contracts, or the city does, with the Sioux Falls Area Humane Society for the fees associated with animal control, such as when they bring in strays, there's going to be impoundment fees, boarding fees, and that sort of thing. And so they're collecting cash on behalf of the city. And animal control is under the, it's under the police department. So we did talk to police management, and they said, yeah, that's probably something we should have audited. We haven't audited it before, so I'm going to recommend before I leave that we put that on the 2017 annual audit plan, that we do kind of a contract compliance audit and then look at the controls that they have for collecting cash.
So you're saying you're auditing the Humane Society?
Yeah, we'll audit the contract that the city has with the Humane Society.
Okay, and then the second question is, on that third paragraph, you said you were receiving payments in currency or checks, and then receiving payments by way of ACH was better. Now, how much fraud is perpetrated by writing a check? Or, I mean, I would think if I'm writing a check that leaves a trail, more so than just the cash aspect.
What's easiest to steal is currency, and I was involved with an investigation in 2002 in the city where it was currency that was being misappropriated at the landfill. And prior to that, when I was in the finance department back in the 80s, we had a case of currency being misappropriated from parking tickets.
Right.
So I haven't seen, at least in the city, I haven't seen any cases where we've had an issue with checks being stolen, but it's more typically the currency. That's a lot easier to convert to personal use than the checks, although checks can be stolen and converted into personal use.
So the ACH, is that like when I go to Sunshine and write a check and then they run it through? And
Yes.
they don't take the check or they give it back to you?
Yes, I think that would be classified as an ACH. It's called automated clearinghouse is what it stands for. And it's, for example, you go online and you pay your bill online. There's no check, there's no currency. It's just...
Comes out of your checking account?
Yeah, basically, it comes out of your checking account. So it's much more efficient, certainly, for the employees don't have to, endorse the checks and get them ready and have them ready to take to the bank and that sort of thing. So it's much more efficient, so...
Councilor Staley, could I ask you to put your mic just a little bit closer to you so that I'm having a little hard time hearing you when you
Oh, really?
you get into, yeah,
I didn't,
if you could
okay, I
move
didn't know I
move
ever.
it just a little closer.
Got
Yeah,
it.
that'd be great, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Oaksall? Thank you, Rich, for a
Right.
job well done again.
Thank you. I'll be back one more time next week, so...
Yep. Yep. Okay. No other business before this body, so I will adjourn this meeting. The informational meeting, or the Land Use Committee meeting, will start in approximately 10 minutes.